On the 13th of August 1889, road worker Dennis Coffey was looking into a report of a strange smell on a side road through the district of Millery, in a suburb of the French city of Lyon, where he came across a large oilskin bag under some bushes. When he looked inside, he found a dead, decomposing body, which the local authorities took in for forensics investigation, a novel practice for the time. 2 days later, a broken trunk with a lock matching a key found near the body was discovered, together with evidence that the trunk had been sent from Paris to Lyon on July the 27th. Forensic surgeon Paul Bernard undertook an autopsy the following day. He reported that the naked body had been tied up with 7 meters of rope and that the head was wrapped in a black oilskin cloth. Cause of death was strangulation, 3 to 5 weeks previously. 3 months later, on the 13th of November, the body was again examined by Dr. Alexandre Lassagne, which must have been quite detailed, as it lasted a week. This time, the body was identified as Toussaint Augustin Gouffret, who had been reported missing, based on a sample of hair taken from his comb and the description of an old back injury in his missing persons report. He was a 49-year-old court bailiff from Paris. He was a widower with 2 daughters and was also said to be a bit of a womanizer. A couple of days after the discovery of Gouffret's body, an abandoned trunk was noticed by a snail trader in another part of the city. The smell left no doubt about its prior use. A tag suggested that the trunk had been brought from Paris to Lyon by rail on the 27th of July 1888 or 1889, as the last figure being unreadable. The records of the railway company found that 1889 was the precise year. This date also corresponded with Gouffret's disappearance. The prosecutor of Lyon alerted authorities in Paris, who in turn entrusted the inquiry to the French Internal Security Service. Inspectors explored Gouffret's habits and relationships and realized that he had previously socialized with a couple of swindlers, Michel Ayeroud and his lover Gabrielle Bompard. Both had hurriedly left Paris on the 27th of July, 2 days before Gouffret was reported missing by his brother-in-law. On the 29th of November, one of the first ever Interpol notices was sent out in the search for Ayeroud and Bompard. Suspicion as people of interest were interviewed was further confirmed when a carpenter in London identified the trunk, which the couple had purchased from him during a trip there. Bompard was born in 1868 and grew up in northern France, the daughter of a widowed metal dealer, as her mother had died when she was 13 years old. As a child, she was reportedly cruel and deceitful and had a poor reputation as a lewd, morally corrupt, lying girl, with using foul language and having bad habits. A burden to his father's live-in mistress, she was consigned to boarding schools and convents, where she repeatedly misbehaved until sent packing. Finally, at her father's request, she was locked up in a correctional institute until she was released when she was 18 and moved to Paris. And her path crossed with Michel Ayeroud's, who was in his mid-40s, and they became lovers. He was once a deserter from the French army, which he joined in 1863, where he was a corporal and had spent many years in America until an amnesty allowed him to return to France. He spoke several languages and was an accomplished con man. He had married a 19-year-old girl in 1870, but being a violent, fickle husband, he soon left his wife to take up a varied career, including engaging in various criminal activities, including fraud. At the time he met the now 22-year-old Bompard and began the affair, he was still married. His bumpy career was in trouble, as he was soon to be accused of fraud, unless he found enough money to plug the hole. Both of them soon came up with what they felt was a simple, foolproof plan. Bompard was to lure a rich man to a flat where they would rob and kill him. The plan to kill Gouffre was made so that they could steal his money. He was a bailiff and process server and was well paid and often had large amounts of money in his possession. Although he usually brought it home for safekeeping, Ayrode was familiar with his habits and knew that on Fridays he left the money at his office while he visited brothels. On July the 24th, Bompard moved into a ground floor flat, which was good for the plan because it had no downstairs neighbours who could hear the murder or the moving of Gouffre's body. As modest as the plan was, its execution was anything but. To get things set up, the would-be murderers travelled to London, where they bought a trunk large enough to accommodate a human body. Next on the shopping list was fabric to be sewn into a body bag, rope, a pulley, and a silk cord to be used as a noose. Back in Paris, Ayrode hammered the pulley into a crossbeam and installed a curtain across an alcove. This was to hide a chair and the hanging rope. Here, he would wait for the victim. Now the couple only needed to snare a man known for carrying large sums of money and susceptible to the lure of women. They had chosen Gouffre, who was clearly interested in Bompard's charms. On the evening of the 26th of July, the trap was set, and Bompard pretended to accidentally meet Gouffre in a Parisian cafe and encouraged him to visit her at the flat, which she rented with Ayrode. He readily accepted her invitation. Everything proceeded according to plan. Bompard, clad in a dressing gown, tied with the silk cord, skillfully manoeuvred Gouffre onto a chaise longue next to the curtain. Her role was to playfully tie the cord into a noose and slip it over the victim's head. This part did not go exactly according to plan, as Bompard froze, and Ayrode brutally took over. He had been concealed behind the curtain and managed to grab the cord and pulled it in an attempt to garrote Gouffre. In the subsequent struggle, the pulley gave under Gouffre's weight, who crashed to the floor when he resisted. Ayrode, now in a panic, sprang out of his hiding place and strangled him with his bare hands instead. They took his ring, watch, keys, and 150 francs before putting him into a bag that Bompard had sewn for this purpose. They both went to search Gouffre's office for the rest of the cash, but did not see the 14,000 francs, which was concealed under some paperwork, and so left empty-handed and frustrated. At around 9 p.m. on the night of the murder, the hall porter of the courthouse had heard someone enter Gouffre's office and leave. He originally thought it was Gouffre, but saw it was not when he spotted a man leave, though he did not see his face. It was a suspected theft, but the next morning, nothing was found missing from the office. 3 days later, Gouffre was reported missing. Bompard spent a sleepless night alone with the trunk containing Gouffre's body, while Ayrode retreated to his marital bed. Having been unable to extract money from Gouffre before his murder, the pair had to get rid of the body. In the morning, the couple had the trunk transported by train to Lyon. Once they collected it there, they travelled to a remote place where they dumped the body. Ayrode tried to destroy the trunk and dispose of the debris further down the road. The plan now in disarray, the only option was to get away, and fast. The best idea, they feverishly thought, was to leave the country, which they did, before they could be caught. A few weeks later, Gouffre's corpse was found near Millery. The investigation into the disappearance started without any clues. When a decomposed body was found, it was connected to the missing man, thanks to the intuition of François Goron, the head of the Paris Sûreté. He did not hesitate to use the press to gather information from anyone willing to cooperate, and there was no shortage of interest from a curious public. When the reconstructed trunk was in the Paris morgue for a week's duration, thousands of people, locals as well as foreign visitors, patiently waited for hours to catch the sight. The police explored Gouffre's habits and relationships and realized that he had frequently socialized with Michel Ayrud and his mistress, Gabrielle Bompard. Prior to his disappearance, the pair had hurriedly left Paris before Gouffre was reported missing. On the 29th of November, one of the first Interpol notices was sent out in the search for Ayrud and Bompard. Suspicion against the two was further confirmed when a carpenter in London identified the trunk, which the couple had purchased from him during a trip there. The fugitive couple made it to Dover, on the south coast of England, by cross-channel ferry, and several days later they boarded a transatlantic steamer in Liverpool, heading for Canada. They travelled from Quebec to Montreal and on to Vancouver, and a few weeks later travelled south to San Francisco. Along the way, they met Georges Garanger, a wealthy Frenchman. He immediately fell under Bompard's spell, which was convenient as Ayrud needed another victim to fleece and kill. Completely confident in Bompard's obedience, he allowed the pair to travel east to meet her aunt. He planned to wait for them in New York and kill Garanger there. That proved to be a mistake. His partner was tired of his frequent brutality and was also falling for the handsome Garanger, and she warned her new lover as soon as they were out of Ayrud's reach. Instead of going to New York, the two diverted to Canada and from there to Europe. During the voyage, Bompard slowly unburdened herself, but Garanger did not fully grasp the reality until they had both reached Paris. Two names were linked to the missing Gouffre, Michel Ayrud and Gabrielle Bompard, both notable by their absence since the victim's disappearance in July. The big hunt began, first in France, then in England, and on to America. From each destination, detectives returned with a wealth of information. There was no doubt whatsoever about the couple's involvement in the Gouffre killing. Long before Bompard's return to France, she and Ayrud became the world's most wanted criminals. Having waited in vain in New York for Bompard, Ayrud was alerted by reports in the American newspapers that a French investigative team was on his heels. He continued his living by engaging in fraudulent activities in the US, Canada, and Mexico. By June 1890, having avoided French policemen on several occasions, he fled to Cuba. He was, at that time, evading arrest in Mexico and then Havana, where international news coverage of the case's developments made staying ahead of the hunt for him easy. During his time running, he sent a letter to a French newspaper blaming Bompard and an unknown person for the murder. But his luck ran out on the 16th of June. He was recognized and apprehended and finally arrested in Havana and transported in a cage back to France. He knew he was finished. Bompard, playing Ayrud's victim, surrendered herself to the police on the 22nd of January, 1890, and was arrested on the spot, the faithful lover Garanger by her side, and she was remanded to prison. At first, she disclaimed any participation in Gouffre's murder, but ended up cracking under questioning by the police and started to tell everything in detail. Perhaps unaware of the severe charges held against her, she thrived on her fame, or rather, infamy. Now that the two criminals were safely locked up, Bompard pleaded extenuating circumstances, claiming she acted under the influence of hypnosis. Ayrud would have none of it. Seething with hatred for her betrayal, he wanted her to share his all-too-certain death sentence. According to him, he never hypnotized Bompard and was acting on her instructions. She had an extensive experience of hypnotism as a child, and many witnesses reported her ability to fall into deep sleep during hypnotic seances. Her every appearance, whether it was a transfer from prison to the Palace of Justice for interrogation, drew huge crowds of onlookers. Her picture appeared in print, and the most trivial details from her fashionable attire to the food she ate, were deemed worthy of public interest. Pleased by so much attention, she did her best to charm the crowd. It was a 4-day trial starting on December the 16th, 1890, at the main Paris court. Bompard told a version of the story in which she claimed to have been the unwitting accomplice of Ayrud and claimed he had done it without her being present at the flat, and then he had told her about it before the two of them left the country. She said they had encountered the man she was now with, Garanger, and Ayrud had wanted to kill him too for the money, but she persuaded her new lover to help her get away and suggested returning to France to give the police her story. She apparently thought explaining her version would be enough to dispel suspicion. Ayrud had initially resigned himself to getting the guillotine, as long as Bompard received the same sentence. Her defense claimed she's under the influence of hypnosis by Ayrud, and that compelled her to help in the murder of Gouffre. Hypnosis was a very popular practice of the period, and so it was suggested that she was his involuntary accomplice, so could not be found guilty. The prosecution maintained that no real murder could result from hypnosis, and that Bompard was faking it. Doctors were brought in to give their opinions. Others, such as the prison doctor, believed Bompard, and even hypnotized her in court as evidence to prove his point. The hypnosis defense was possibly taken so seriously due to the court drama. She was a young, pretty woman who knew how to put on a show, and the idea of hypnotism fascinated the public in the court. In the end, it fell to the jury to decide the outcome. Bompard won the hypnosis argument, and while she was found guilty, she escaped full blame and execution because of extenuating circumstances. She was given a comparatively lenient sentence of 20 years of hard labour, which was spent in the female prison of Nanterre and in Clermont jail. Michel Ayrud received the death sentence and was publicly guillotined in Paris one cold morning on the 3rd of February, 1891, by the executioner Louis Diebler. Bompard was freed in 1905, before the expiry of her prison term, serving 12 years, having benefited from several reductions of the penalty for good conduct. Little is known about her life after she was released, but it is known that she died in obscurity in the early 1920s.